Number 1, in the Old West, having a horse wasn't a luxury. It was a matter of life or death. With $100, you could buy a broken Mustang at cattle auctions, usually for somewhere between $80 and $100. We're not talking about those pretty horses we see in Hollywood movies. These were tough animals raised to pull a plow, haul loads, and cross endless plains. A lot of them didn't last long. They'd die from exhaustion or sickness along the way. A better horse, a decent all-around workhorse, already cost more than $150. So, with $100, you got what you could. But here's the detail most people don't know. Records from the 1870s show that cowboys spent on the horse first before they even thought about food. And it made sense because in that world, being on foot meant being vulnerable. The distances were so huge that without a horse, your chances of surviving dropped drastically. Number 2, in 1870, a Sharps rifle cost around $50. That means with $100 you could take 2 home. Now think about what that really meant. The Sharps was the rifle that took down millions of bison across the American plains. Professional hunters could hit targets from over 900 m away. It was a precision machine at a time when most guns missed badly past 100 m. Cowboys and settlers preferred the Sharps over any expensive revolver because the ammo was cheap and one well-placed shot solved the problem. Whether it was a huge bison or an outlaw on the horizon, the army used it on a large scale, too. So, with $100, an average man could arm himself better than many soldiers back then and still have a spare rifle in case the first one broke or he needed to lend it to a neighbor in trouble. Number 3, with $100 in your pocket, a man could buy 20 acres of land in the Old West, paying about $5 per acre in a straight purchase. Now, the federal government had another option through the Homestead Act of 1862, which offered 160 acres for a fee of just $14. The problem is that land came with conditions. You had to live on it for 5 years and farm the soil, otherwise you lost everything. A lot of people chose to pay full price, so they wouldn't have to depend on those rules. 20 acres doesn't sound like much today, but back then it was enough to keep a garden, raise a few animals, and feed a whole family. The detail people don't talk about much is that a lot of that land was in areas where drought wiped out crops for years in a row. Historians estimate that almost 2/3 of settlers who tried their luck ended up abandoning their properties before they made it to 5 years. Number 4, in the Old West, a saddle was just as important as the horse itself. A cowboy with a poorly made saddle could end up with sores on his legs that kept him off the job for weeks. A quality saddle made of reinforced leather with sturdy stirrups cost around $60. With $100 in your pocket, you could buy a top-of-the-line saddle and still have enough left for a set of bits and reins. The detail most people don't know is that a lot of ranches deducted the cost of gear straight from a ranch hand's pay. According to catalogs like Montgomery Ward's 1872 catalog, an average cowboy had to save for months just to get properly set up. It was a survival investment, not a luxury. Number 5, $100 could buy you a brand new breech-loading shotgun and still leave you with some change for a good amount of cartridges. This kind of gun cost around $60 and was considered cutting-edge technology in the Old West. The difference was huge compared to the old muzzleloaders, which you could find used for $8. With the breech-loading one, you reloaded in seconds, while the old model required that whole process of ramming powder and the projectile down the barrel. But here's a curious detail. Most settlers didn't buy the more expensive version. They prefer to spend less on the gun and save the rest of the money for other needs like food and tools. People living on the frontier knew that survival depended more on being practical than on having the best gear available. Number 6. In 1873, Colt released the single-action army, which people soon started calling the Peacemaker. In the Sears catalog, you could order one by mail for around $17. That means with $100, you could buy 5 or 6 of these and outfit a whole group without leaving home. Now, what Hollywood doesn't show is that most cowboys carried old, beat-up revolvers, often models from the Civil War. A brand new Peacemaker was something for people who had money. And if you really wanted to impress, there was a version with a pearl grip and tooled leather holsters. That set cost exactly $100 and became a symbol of authority. Lawmen like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson carried versions like that. And it wasn't just vanity. It was a way to show power without saying a word. Number 7, $100 got a roof over your head. In the Old West, a prefabricated wooden house with 2 bedrooms cost around $300. With $100, you could cover the down payment and strike a deal with the seller. But if a guy didn't have credit, there was another way. The so-called shanties, small wooden shacks, went for $25 each. That means with $100, you could put up 4 of them. Immigrants did this all the time. They put them up fast, sometimes in 2 or 3 days. Now, don't picture anything comfortable. The floor was packed dirt. The walls had gaps where wind, dust, and all kinds of critters got in. Rats, fleas, and bed bugs were guaranteed company. A lot of people slept with a cloth over their face, just so they wouldn't swallow an insect during the night. That was the price of having a place to call your own back then. Number 8, in the Old West, having a stable with a well cost around $150. So, with $100, you were pretty close to getting your own. And look, that wasn't any kind of luxury. It was really about survival. Without a stable, your horses and cattle were exposed to storms, extreme heat, and predators. A lot of people lost animals that way, but the well, that was the real gold on the property. In dry regions like Arizona and Nevada, entire families depended on a single well to drink, cook, and keep their livestock alive. When the well dried up, there was no arguing. You abandoned everything and left. There are records of ranches completely deserted in the middle of nowhere simply because the water ran out. A neighbor with a working well had more bargaining power than a banker in town. Water in the West wasn't a resource. It was currency. Number 9. In the Old West, anyone who farmed new oxen were better than horses for heavy work. A full yoke with 2 oxen cost around $58. So with $100, you'd get a used pair or just one animal. On the wheat farms of Kansas, oxen were the power that kept everything moving. They plowed the tough prairie soil, pulled wagons loaded with grain, and could handle long days without needing the same care a horse required. What's interesting is that a lot of farmers preferred oxen exactly because they were cheaper to keep. A horse ate grain, an ox ate grass, and when an ox got too old to work, it still ended up as meat on the table. It was an investment you could use all the way to the end. $100 for a used pair could be the difference between getting a harvest in and a family going hungry in the winter. Number 10. In 1870, a dairy cow cost about $26. That means with $100 in your pocket, a guy could take home 3 or 4 cows at once. And look, that was no small thing. Having cattle in the Old West was basically like having cash grazing in your backyard. A cow produced milk, butter, and cheese for the family. And whatever was left went straight into local trade. But it gets even more interesting when you find out the other prices. A breeding bull could cost up to $90, almost a full month's pay for a cowboy. Meanwhile, a calf went for just $2.50. So, a smart farmer would start by buying a few cows and a cheap calf. And in a few years, he'd already have a solid-sized herd. That's how a lot of families built wealth back then. 1 head of cattle at a time. Number 11. In the 1870s, a brand new buggy cost around $75. That means with $100, you could take the vehicle home and still keep $25 in your pocket for maintenance. And yeah, maintenance was a big deal because roads in the Old West could wreck wheels and axles in the blink of an eye. The buggy was the family car back then, especially for people living in towns like Tombstone or Dodge City. Not everyone knew how to ride a horse well, especially women in those long dresses and little kids. So, the buggy solved that problem. A curious detail is that a lot of rural doctors depended completely on these buggies to visit patients on distant farms. Without one, whole communities went without medical care. Number 12. In the Old West, a wagon cost around $65. It sounds cheap, but for most families back then, saving up that kind of money took months of hard work. With $100 in your pocket, you could buy a wagon and still have some change left to put into repairs or a tough canvas cover to protect the load. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the wagon wasn't just transportation. It was basically the line between living and dying. Without it, there was no way to haul food, tools, water, and everything a family needed to survive on a trail hundreds of miles long through the desert. A lot of settlers sold almost everything they owned just to make sure they had a wagon before heading west. And here's a detail that really hits. It's estimated that along the most famous trails like the Oregon Trail, thousands of wagons were left behind on the way because the oxen died from exhaustion and families kept going on foot. Number 13. In the Old West, a complete set of plow and farming tools cost around $25. A fortune that few people could pull together all at once. But with $100 in your pocket, a guy could buy a basic plow for about $25 and still have enough left for hoes, shovels, and seeds for the first crop. And here's the detail a lot of people don't know. Thousands of families who got free land through the Homestead Act of 1862 depended on exactly this kind of early investment to turn raw land into something that put food on the table. Without these tools, those 160 acres the government promised were nothing but weeds and dust. A well-spent $100 was literally the difference between building a new life or losing everything and heading back east empty-handed. Number 14. A barrel of flour weighed almost 90 kilos and cost around $3 in towns with railroad access. With $100 in your pocket, a guy could take home 33 barrels like that. Sounds like a lot, and it really was. It could feed an entire family for over a year just on bread and biscuits. But here's the detail that changes everything. That price only applied in places where the train actually reached. In mining areas or more isolated territories, the same barrel could jump to $20 or even $40. All of a sudden, that $100 barely bought 3 barrels. Teamsters charged a fortune to haul goods over dirt trails. A lot of people went truly hungry in the Old West, not because the country was short on flour, but because the cost of getting it to remote places made it almost out of reach for ordinary workers. Number 15. In 1870, sugar cost between 7 and 10 cents per pound. That means $100 could buy more than 1,000 pounds of it. Sounds like a lot, right? But here's the detail most people don't know. In eastern cities, sugar was an everyday thing. In the Old West, it was basically barter money. Merchants at remote outposts charged double or triple the normal price. And coffee, 12 cents a pound. With $100, a guy could take home more than 800 pounds. Cowboys lived on coffee. It was the first thing they made before dawn, and the last thing they drank before going to sleep. Without sugar, it tasted strong and bitter. That's why anyone who had both together at camp was considered a lucky man. Drivers would even trade coffee and sugar for ammo or tobacco on cattle trails between Texas and Kansas. Number 16. $100 in the Old West could buy enough clothes to outfit a small town. Calico fabric cost 10 cents a yard. So with $100, you could buy 1,000 yards and sew shirts for the whole family for years. A full suit ran between $10 and $20. So a cowboy could have 5 or even 10 outfits, something most people never had in their life. Now boots, those were about survival. A new pair cost between $5 and $8 and protected you from rattlesnakes and trails that tore up any kind of footwear. With $100, you could buy between 12 and 20 pairs. And the hat, which cost between $2 and $5 new and 50 cents used, wasn't about vanity at all. The desert sun killed more people in the West than any shootout. With $100, a man could buy between 20 and 50 hats. Number 17. In 1870, a stagecoach ticket between towns cost around $10. With $100 in your pocket, you could cover the trip for 10 people at once. Sounds like a good deal, but the reality was very different from what you imagine. These trips lasted days, sometimes weeks, with stops at rough little stations in the middle of nowhere. Passengers were crammed onto hard wooden benches, swallowing dust the whole way. And the danger was real since stagecoach robberies were so common that companies started hiring armed guards sitting next to the driver. That's where the phrase riding shotgun comes from, the one we still use today. Even so, for anyone who didn't have their own horse or needed to travel with their family, the stagecoach was the only real option. $100 could get a whole group across territories that would take you months to cross on foot alone. Number 18. $100 in the Old West could get a man out of jail faster than he got in. Most frontier towns had a pretty simple justice system. You caused trouble. The sheriff locked you up and someone paid to get you out. A typical bail for a saloon fight ran between $5 and $20. That means with $100 in your pocket, you could get yourself into trouble several times and still walk free. But here's the detail most people don't know. In places like Dodge City and Tombstone, justices of the peace earned a cut of the fines they collected. In other words, the more people got arrested, the more money they made. Justice in the West wasn't blind. It had its eyes wide open for money. $100 didn't just buy freedom. It also bought the judge's smile. Number 19. $100 worth of whiskey in the Old West was serious business. You could buy around 50 bottles of real Kentucky bourbon. While most cowboys drank that cheap stuff mixed with tobacco and pepper that people called rock gut, anyone with that kind of money drank the real deal. Whole saloons could run for weeks on that kind of stock. A barrel of good bourbon cost between $8 and $15 depending on the region. So, with $100 you could basically set up a full bar. The funny thing is a lot of saloon owners bought the Real bourbon and watered it down to make it last longer, selling each shot for 10 cents. In the end, anyone who put $100 into whiskey could make 3 times that back.